Welcome back, everybody, to another fantastic Building Regs 101 with the phenomenal Mr. Mike Woods. Now, Mike, following our last series on what are building regs, we've had a number of inquiries come in saying, I'm doing a loft conversion. Now, does building regs apply? So I thought it would be a good idea for us to put together a little video explaining what building regs apply. But more to the point, somebody actually dropped a message on there to say that they were looking at buying a building that had a loft conversion, but unfortunately, they couldn't find the building reg certificate. Now, we've got a couple of different things here to pick through and have a look at. So welcome back, Mike, and thank you very much for joining us again today. Would you like to sort of kick this off? Shall we start with how a loft conversion should be done and what rules and regulations it has to comply with?
Certainly. Well, Happy New Year to you, Andrew, and thank you again so much for inviting me on and being able to share the knowledge that I have for ultimately the benefit of your audience, and ultimately to give them the information so that they can avoid making costly mistakes, because obviously that's what we want to do, really. So yeah, so as we've said in the other series and the other episodes we've done on the building regulations, as people now know that I've been in the architectural business since '95. So my background is architecture as well as property investor. So loft conversions. So basically, as you just said, now a customer or inquiry comes in that they're buying a property, loft's been converted, and no building regulations, and it was done behind closed doors, as it were. You know, this is amazing how common this is. I get quite a few calls, and I have done over the years, of customers saying that I've indeed done a loft conversion, and I'm now looking to sell my property, and the purchaser's solicitor's asking for a building regs completion certificate, and I didn't get one. And I said, well, why? Why did you not get building control involved to make sure, oh, well, the builder said he knows what he's doing and it'll all be done properly. And I didn't think I was going to sell it then, but now I am selling it, and now I need the certificate. So what do I do?
So this is obviously a problem, and I've seen loft conversions and people have put almost vertical stairs in, which, let's say in the event of a fire, I wouldn't want to come down them in the dark without handrails and adequate stairing. Is it possible for us to solve this problem by doing this retrospectively, or would you advise, like in the last series, that we get it done right first time round?
Yeah, of course. You know, building regulations, you know, they're not people that you don't want to deal with. Here's what I think what happens. I think people have a dealing with planning, a planning department, a planning officer, and they have a bit of a tough journey through this process. And they go, you know what? I've got to do regs now, and to do it properly, and I've got to deal with the local authority again. And they go, oh, gosh, that's so painful. Because with respect, and no disrespect, if we have one of your listeners who's a building regulations officer, you know, they are old school. They tend to be of that sort of non-commercial aspect. And that's why people gravitate to private building control, because there's more of a business head on those people. So people think they're going to get a smoother run by going to a private building control officer. And you know what? I would tend to agree. The thing is,
we did a video on that just up here as well, so we'll put the link to that video for you to follow into.
Yeah, great. But they both work into the same rules, okay? So this is a book that I've constantly got on my desk. This is called The Building Regulations Explained and Illustrated. It's a substantial book. You can get it on Amazon. I don't get any commissions on it, but you know, I really believe if people are doing property, they need to have this book. The actual building regulations is available online, and you can download them, but each document is there are thousands of pages, and trawling your way through them is hard work if you don't know what you're looking at. So I guess the purpose of this video will help narrow things down and explain to people what they need to be aware of. But going back to your earlier question and your earlier point, the steep stairs, the works that have been done, the loft conversion, and they're just using it. So the building regulations are, as we've mentioned before, for those who haven't tuned in before, they're a set of approved documents, and they govern the quality of construction in the UK. It's a minimum standard of materials and workmanship. So it's to make sure that things are done in a proper manner. So the building regulations is split up into a number of parts, and they're called approved documents, and we've referred to them as parts. So part A of the building regulations covers structure. So in the case of a loft conversion, the structural elements are the floor joists and the roof. In a new build, it's foundations and walls, but in a loft conversion, it's just the roof element. So if you think about it, if you go upstairs from your ground floor to your first floor and you land on your floor, then those floor joists are sized to suit the loadings of the live loads. That's people running around, jumping and doing whatever they would do on a floor, walking. Then there's the dead loads, which are the furnitures. So those joists are sized accordingly. If you go up into your loft, what's up there is basically a ceiling joist. Now your ceiling joist is sized only to carry the weight of the ceiling below, and it has its inherent span thickness to stop it deflecting, but it's not a floor joist, so it's not there intended for load bearing. So the live loads, now yes, by all means you can go up there and access the area for storage, but you know, if you start loading a floor up, you'll soon get cracking in your first floor ceilings or second floor ceilings, whatever.
So to put this into context for the audience here, typically a ceiling joist, if you went into your loft and looked at the ceiling joist, it will be some timber about 3 inches by 2 inches.
Exactly. Yeah, the old 3 by 2 in old money, and invariably they would have been built back
That's right.
then. So the old 3 by 2.
If you're looking at that from a floor joist point of view, and I've done many loft conversions, and I'm sure you have, I typically put 8 by 2 timbers in to take the load, and they're stressed as C24 timbers, so the knots are 24 inches apart. Now your ceiling joist will be much thinner and will generally be a C16, so they can have more.
Correct. Absolutely correct. So
I'm going a little bit technical, but it's explaining an 8-inch timber versus a 3-inch timber.
Yeah. So C16 is the normal strength. It's a structural grade of a timber. And if you just go to any builder's merchant and you just buy 3 by 2, 4 by 2, it's generally what's called C16, and it's just general grade timber. If you then start going into floors, you can use C16, but you can also go to C24, and it's a stronger structural grade. So for example, let's say a 200 mil by 50 mil joist, which is the old 8 by 2, that would span in C16, say 4.5 meters. But if you went C24, you could stretch that to say 5 meters. Now, I'll be, I don't have the exact lengths and spans off the top of my head, but what I can tell the audience, if they do want to make a note, if they just type into Google or whatever search engine, Trada joist spans. Trada are the recognized body for stress grading timber, and they will give tables of what size joists will do what spans. So, 150 by 38, 150 by 50, 150 by 75 spans. So obviously the depth and the chunkiness of the timber goes to your spans. So you're spot on, Andrew. So just as we said, you go up into your loft, it'll be the old 3 by 2, 75 mil by 50 mil timber as a ceiling joist, whereas typically on your first floor, your joist would definitely be 7 inches, 175 to 200 mil by 50 mil. And that's usually your normal standard grade joist. So if you can imagine, if the audience can imagine that you've got a timber which is 8 inches, 200 mil, that's your joist, and their ceiling joist is just 3 inches, 75 mil. It's woefully inadequate to take any loadings. So the first thing we've got to consider is under document A structure, is we have to improve the depth of that joist. So the considerations are, if the existing ceiling joists are running front to back and they mid-span on a load-bearing wall mid-span of the property, then the question is, what is the distance, the distance from the wall plate, which is where the roof intersects with the ceiling. What is the distance between the wall plate and that load-bearing point, and then that load-bearing point to the rear wall plate? It's often equal. Now, if those spans go beyond the capability of a C24 structural grade timber, if you get a deep house and it's circa 9 meters, 10 meters deep, as a potentially large HMO can be, then you're running on the edge of the limits of a joist, a 200 or a 225 mil joist, wall plate to mid-span load-bearing point, and then mid-span load-bearing point to the rear wall plate. So that's the main consideration of getting this joist in. Now, quite often is the case, is they will side by side the joist. So they'll run the new joist side by side to the existing, thereby not having to necessarily drop the first or second floor ceiling, whichever level it's at, to make things convenient. So that's the first thing. Let's get the floor loading.
You can often find that they're bolted together, which is called sistering.
Correct.
And sometimes if the spans are large, you'll put 2 8x4s and bolt them together to give additional structural strength.
Correct. So once we've got the floor in and the joists are sized appropriately, i.e. by the structural requirement in structure A, then we move on to the access. So how do we get up there? So stairway. So stairs are now covered by document and part K in the document. Now, for a domestic stair, the maximum rise of a stair is 200 mil. And the minimum going, which is the tread on a stairs, is 225 mil. This is standard. You can't buy a stair, you can buy a stair off the shelf at Howdens or the other builders merchants. You can't buy a non-compliant stair, okay? They just don't exist. If you went to a stair manufacturer, a specialist stair maker, they would know these rules. So I don't think the audience need to be worried about, do I really need to know about the going and the rise? Because no manufacturer will make a non-compliant stair, okay? So maximum rise 200 mil, minimum going 225. So really it's a case of measuring your existing finished floor of your first floor, second floor, the floor below the attic, and then going and measuring vertically up to your new joist height, plus your floor finish, which is your floorboard, 22 mil way rock, or it could be a 22 mil floorboard itself. And then divide that by 200 mil. And it probably won't work. If it was conveniently 2.6, there'd be 13 risers. But if it was 2550, it would still be 13 risers, but they would now be something like 195 mil each, which is fine. Maximum 200, minimum. And the other point is, if people didn't know, every stair must be identical in its rise. If you have a first step or a last step, which is not the same, it's a trip hazard, because the pattern of going up a stair, and then if one slightly different, there's a trip hazard. So another particular part of part K is that every rise and going must be the same. So part K will cover the stairway. And there's other aspects of this as well. So there is a requirement for a minimum headroom. So this is often a problem when people come to me and they say, we want to do a loft conversion. And I then, before I even go to see the property to see if it's feasible, I ask them where they would like to site the stairs. And I must admit, the most convenient point from a design point of view of a stair to go up to an attic is on top of the original stair. Because if you've got one stair landing, to come along the landing and go up in the same fashion, that's a really good design. It works conveniently because you're working off the same landing. So it's a
like
good
most shops, you'll come up an escalator, you'll get to the
Correct.
landing, you'll turn around and then go up the next escalator.
Yeah,
and the downward one ways go on the opposite side.
It's the most efficient design, okay? Now, sometimes we might lose a couple of feet or half a meter from a bedroom to get around the landing to get up, but it is the most efficient design to try and get a stair. And the other point is for the audience is always try and put the stair in the direction of the joists. Because if you're running with the direction of the joist, you only have to create the void of 2 joists wide, maybe going to the 3rd with a trimmer, and that gives you your 850 mil space. If you go 90 degrees to the joist, you're cutting all the way through your joist. You've now got to, under part A structure, support those ends that you're now cutting, if that makes sense. So it does make sense.
You've effectively weakened the structure.
Correct.
Because all the ends of your joists are just flopping and hanging.
Correct.
So you have to double string those to bind them.
And the other thing is, and you can go right down the rabbit hole with this, is the ceiling joist, the existing ceiling joist, is invariably fixed to the wall plate, which is fixed to the end of the rafter, and it's acting as a tie to stop the main roof doing any collapse. So if you start cutting a number of joists, if you think that the joist is, say, 600 mil apart or 400 mil, and your void is 2.9 meters, that's a lot of joists that you're cutting, and you're loosening the integrity of the tie of the wall plates. So again, you've got to think this way. So going back to often when I get a query, I ask people, where are your existing stairs? And do you think we could get a new stairs on top of that stair going up? And remember, as we alight the stairs, as we go up, we need to maintain 2 meter headroom. So my client might say, well, I've got a hipped roof. So when I'm going up, I'm going to hit my head on the roof because it's a hip. The side, there's not a gable, if that makes sense to the audience, a hip.
Well, I've straightened hips up to gables and it
Put
gains you a
dormers.
phenomenal amount of floor space. So I can highly recommend straightening hips up to gable ends.
But if planning doesn't permit that because of symmetry, they might allow a dormer on the hip because you just need that dormer to provide that headroom as you come up. And if you get your design right, we add what's called a kite to the stair. So that's a point on the stair. Instead of having a complete straight flight, you get 5 or 4 treads short, and you start turning 90 degrees, which is better for the design because then you access the space square on rather than coming up the stairs and then turning left or right into the space. So I tend to like, when I do stairs, is a kite at the bottom. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, a straight flight, and then 8, 9, 10, 12 at the top. And that really does work efficiently because you then use the landing that exists to step onto the stair, and then you step off the stair into a space. So that's K. And of course, what comes along with K is the handrail has to be at a certain height. So if we've covered part A structure, we've got that sorted. Then we need to get up there, which is part K, the stairs. So
just a point on the stairs. I mean, what you're describing there is effectively what I would call castle type stairs, where you've got the little triangular stairs. Another way, I've got properties where I've done Turner stairs in that fashion, kite fashion, or I've created a platform. So I'll walk part way up, I'll have a platform, and then 90-degree dog leg, the stairs will go up again.
Correct.
To finish off the run.
The
So there's
kite,
multiple ways of achieving it.
Yeah, the kite flight kite, as we call it, as I call it, that's quite an efficient design, because you see, what people have got to understand as well is not only you have the stair, but the space in front of a stair has to be the same width as a stair. So the landing depth has to be the same as the width. So you have to effectively have a square at the bottom of the stair and the top of the stair, which is effectively 850 to 900 square as a landing. So if you've already got a landing, then you turn off it onto the stair. The only issue then when you get up is you turn and you walk onto a space before your door into that space. So now we go on to document B, fire. So it takes us nicely on to document B, fire.
And now going back to stairs briefly before we go on to fire, I've actually been in properties with a view to purchase, and they've done a loft conversion, and I would describe it not as a loft ladder, but almost like a wooden ladder to get up into the loft. Is that fire compliant, Mike?
It's not at all. It's not at all. In the event of escape for fire, it's an absolute hazard. So in a domestic private arrangement where you've got access to one room for a hobby room or something, you know, they call them paddle ladders, where sometimes you've got a left and a right and a left and a right, space saver stairs. That acceptable for use in domestic arrangements only. If you're talking about HMOs, no, it's not going to happen in that sort of commercial element, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So moving on to fire, document B, there are two sections in B. One covers residential use and one covers buildings in other than dwellings. So B1 covers domestic and new build. So document B, fire, when I first had one of the early editions of this back in the 90s, because building regulations really only came into play in the 90s, document B, fire, was a very thin element, and it's grown to a monster now, because obviously as we become more aware of the damage and the detriment of fire to a property and the damage it caused to life. So B has become very serious now. So there's a number of elements. So in a nutshell, document B is the early warning and early escape from fire. That's basically what it's all about. Being able to get away early and getting away safely.
So effectively, we're talking about a fire alarm system of some description,
absolutely,
or a fire warning system,
absolutely,
within
absolutely.
the area.